The cold March wind whipped against my face as I stood in front of Michael's workshop. My husband of 43 years was gone, taken by a sudden heart attack 3 weeks ago. The funeral was a blur of faces and whispered condolences. Now, at 65, I found myself alone, still processing the shock of his absence and the even greater shock of what came after. "You should sell it, Margaret," my mother-in-law Evelyn had said with thinly veiled disdain during the reading of the will. "That old building isn't worth maintaining." Michael always was sentimental about worthless things. The barb was aimed at me, as it had been for over 4 decades. In Evelyn's eyes, I was the worthless thing her precious son had clung to. The will had been a devastating surprise to everyone, especially Michael's 2 brothers. The family home, our modest savings, and nearly everything of value had been left to them and to Evelyn. All that remained for me was our small bungalow on the outskirts of Portland and Michael's workshop. The brothers had smirked when the lawyer read that part, exchanging knowing glances with their mother. I clutched the iron key tightly in my gloved hand, its weight strangely reassuring. 43 years married, and in the last 5, Michael had become increasingly secretive about his workshop. "Just working on projects, Maggie," he'd say with that gentle smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "Nothing for you to worry about." Once I'd been his partner in everything, but lately he'd changed the locks and kept me away, claiming he was working on a surprise. The wind gusted again, sending dried leaves skittering across the gravel driveway. My bungalow sat behind me, feeling emptier than it had ever been. Ahead stood the workshop, a converted barn with weathered red siding that Michael had been meaning to repaint for years. Now he never would. I took a deep breath and approached the door. The padlock was new, installed just months before Michael's death. I slid the key in and turned it, hearing the satisfying click of the mechanism releasing. The door creaked open, and the familiar smell of sawdust, metal, and oil washed over me. "Oh, Michael," I whispered, stepping inside. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the high windows. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Workbenches lined the walls, tools hung in their designated places, half-finished wooden projects sat waiting for hands that would never return. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed something unusual tucked in the far corner. A metal filing cabinet I'd never seen before, with a small safe beside it. I made my way across the concrete floor, my sensible shoes echoing in the silence. The filing cabinet was locked, but a small key hung from a nail driven into the wall beside it, labeled simply "For Maggie." My heart lurched. Whatever was in here, Michael had intended for me to find it. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the filing cabinet. The top drawer slid open smoothly, revealing dozens of meticulously labeled folders. "Land deeds," read one. "Patents," said another. "Investments." "Business contracts." My breath caught in my throat as I pulled out folder after folder, scanning their contents with increasing disbelief. The safe proved easier to open than I'd feared. The combination was our anniversary date. Inside was $150,000 in cash, neatly bundled, along with a sealed envelope with my name written in Michael's familiar handwriting. I sank onto his worn leather workshop stool, the envelope heavy in my hands. With careful fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages of his handwriting. "My dearest Maggie," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've discovered what I've been keeping from you. Not out of lack of trust, my love, but to protect you from what's coming. My family has been stealing from us for years." I gasped, the words swimming before my eyes. I blinked hard and continued reading. It started small: Jason borrowing from the family business account, Mother manipulating Dad's will to exclude you, Peter doctoring the books at the furniture store. I discovered it 5 years ago but couldn't bear to tell you. Instead, I've been gathering evidence, making alternative investments, and preparing for the day they'd try to leave you with nothing." The letter went on, detailing how Michael had secretly been building a separate fortune away from his family's prying eyes. The patents in the filing cabinet were for engine modifications he'd developed and sold to major manufacturers. The land deeds were for properties across Oregon and Washington, purchased through a corporation he'd established solely in my name. The business they think is failing is actually thriving. But I've been channeling the profits elsewhere. You are now the majority shareholder in Winchester Holdings, a company worth approximately $4.2 million. My family believes they've left you with nothing but a broken-down workshop and our little house. In reality, you now control everything. I reread the last paragraph several times, my mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what Michael had done. Be careful, Maggie. They won't take this well when they discover the truth. I've arranged for Alan Prescott to be your attorney. He knows everything and has been my trusted friend through this whole ordeal. His contact information is in the blue folder. Take your time, process this. Then when you're ready, claim what's rightfully yours. I'm sorry for the deception and for leaving you to face this alone. I had hoped we'd have more time, that I could make this right while I was still by your side. Know that I loved you completely, from the moment we met until my last breath. The letter was signed simply, "Forever yours, Michael." I sat in stunned silence, the only sound the occasional creak of the old building settling. Outside, the world continued as normal, but in here, everything had changed. I thought of Evelyn's smug expression at the will reading, of Peter's condescending offer to help me sell the worthless workshop for whatever I could get. They thought I was defeated. I carefully replaced the letter in its envelope and stood up, a strange calm settling over me. Michael had given me one final gift, not just the security he'd secretly built, but the chance to stand up to the family that had belittled and undermined me for decades. I looked around the workshop with new eyes. What had seemed like a burden, the last meager bequest from a beloved husband, was actually the key to a truth that would change everything. "All right, Michael," I whispered to the empty room, a new resolve straightening my spine. "Let's finish what you started." I spent the next 3 days going through every file, every document Michael had left for me. The scope of his secret work was staggering. Winchester Holdings owned not only our furniture manufacturing business, the one his brothers thought was barely staying afloat, but also 6 commercial properties in downtown Portland, a small office building in Seattle, and controlling interest in a promising tech startup based in Bend. The blue folder contained, as promised, the contact information for Alan Prescott, along with detailed instructions on how to proceed. I called the number on a Tuesday morning, surprised when a receptionist answered with, "Prescott." "Hammonds and Way, how may I direct your call?" Apparently, Alan wasn't just some small-town attorney. He was the founding partner of one of Portland's most prestigious law firms. "Mrs. Winchester," Alan greeted me warmly when I was finally connected. His voice was deep and reassuring. "I've been expecting your call. Michael said you'd need some time to process everything. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I replied, finding it strange to discuss such personal matters with a man I'd never met. There's so much to take in. "I understand. Michael spoke of you often and with great admiration. He wanted to protect you from his family's schemes. But he also knew you were stronger than they ever gave you credit for." There was genuine respect in his tone. "Would you like to come to my office tomorrow? We have much to discuss regarding your position as CEO of Winchester Holdings." CEO. The title sounded foreign, impossible. I was Margaret Winchester, a former elementary school teacher who'd retired 5 years ago to help Michael with the bookkeeping for what I thought was a struggling family business. I was the woman who brought coffee to board meetings, but was never invited to sit at the table. I was the wife who'd been tolerated but never truly accepted by the Winchester family. And now, according to Alan Prescott and the documents spread across my kitchen table, I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation. Yes, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Tomorrow works perfectly. Shall we say 10 a.m.? The Prescott, Hammonds, and Way offices occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming high-rise in downtown Portland. I felt distinctly out of place as I rode the elevator up, wearing my best outfit, a navy blue skirt suit I'd purchased for a cousin's wedding 2 years ago. The young man who shared the elevator with me was impeccably dressed in what I assumed was a very expensive suit, tapping away at his phone with manicured fingers. Alan Prescott turned out to be nothing like I expected. Rather than the gray-haired, distinguished attorney I'd imagined, he was a man in his early 40s with kind eyes and an easy smile. He greeted me warmly and ushered me into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. "Michael spoke of you so often I feel as though we're already acquainted," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the comfortable leather chairs facing his desk. "He was extremely proud of you, Mrs. Winchester." "Please, call me Margaret," I said, still feeling overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding me. "Or Maggie. Michael always called me Maggie." Alan nodded. "Maggie it is. Now, I understand you've had a chance to review the documents Michael left for you. Do you have any initial questions before we discuss next steps?" I had 1,000 questions, but one burned brighter than the rest. Why didn't he tell me? We shared everything, or at least I thought we did. Alan's expression softened. He struggled with that decision. But Michael was convinced that the less you knew, the safer you would be from his family's manipulations. He was gathering evidence of their financial misconduct, evidence that could potentially result in criminal charges. He didn't want you implicated in any way if things went sideways. "Criminal charges?" I echoed, my mind reeling. "Against his brothers? Against Evelyn?" "I'm afraid so. The evidence suggests systematic embezzlement from the family business, tax fraud, and in Jason's case, some rather troubling investment schemes that border on Ponzi territory." Alan slid a folder across his desk. "This contains the highlights. Michael documented everything meticulously." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were bank statements, transferred funds, doctored accounting ledgers, all annotated in Michael's neat handwriting. According to these documents, Peter and Jason had been siphoning money from the business for years, hiding their theft by manipulating the books and blaming the company's apparent struggles on market conditions. Most shocking was evidence of Evelyn's involvement. My mother-in-law, who had always presented herself as above the sordid details of business, had been actively helping her sons hide assets from tax authorities and directing them on which accounts to target. "Michael discovered this 5 years ago?" I asked, thinking back to when my husband had first begun excluding me from the workshop. Alan nodded. That's when he came to me. He was devastated, especially by his mother's involvement. He'd always believed she was merely difficult, not criminal. What did he hope to accomplish with all this evidence? Initially, he wanted to confront them, demand they return the stolen funds, and restructure the business to remove their control. But as he dug deeper, he realized the problem was more extensive than he'd first thought. That's when he began creating Winchester Holdings as a separate entity and transferring legitimate assets into it. Alan leaned forward. "Michael was playing a long game. He wanted to secure your future while gathering enough evidence to hold his family accountable. I thought back to family dinners where Evelyn would make cutting remarks about my background, about how I'd never truly understand the Winchester way of doing things. All while she was orchestrating the systematic theft of the company my husband had helped build. So what happens now?" I asked, closing the folder. Alan smiled. "That's entirely up to you, Maggie. Legally, you hold all the cards. Winchester Holdings owns controlling interest in the family business. The properties they think belong to the original Winchester Corporation have actually been transferred to Holdings. As CEO, you can choose to remove Peter and Jason from their positions, restructure the company, or even sell it entirely. And the evidence of their crimes can be turned over to the authorities at your discretion, or used as leverage in negotiations. Alan's expression turned serious. But I should warn you, they won't go quietly. Once they realize what Michael has done, they'll fight back with everything they have. I sat back in my chair, the magnitude of the decision before me settling heavily on my shoulders. For decades, I'd endured Evelyn's subtle cruelties and her son's dismissive attitudes. I'd been the outsider, the schoolteacher who wasn't good enough for their precious Michael. Despite his constant assurances that I was everything he wanted, now I had the power to destroy them. The thought should have been satisfying, but instead, it left me feeling hollow. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course, Alan replied. Michael said you'd be thorough in your considerations. He admired that about you, your ability to see all sides of a situation before making a decision. He reached into his desk and pulled out a business card. My personal number is on the back. Call any time, day or night. As I stood to leave, Alan added, just one more thing. Michael left a safety deposit box at First National on Morrison Street. The key and box number are in the safe at the workshop. He was quite insistent that you should retrieve its contents before making any decisions. I nodded, wondering what other secrets my husband had kept. As I walked through the reception area toward the elevators, I noticed a familiar figure rising from one of the plush waiting area chairs, Jason Winchester. My younger brother-in-law, immaculately dressed in a tailored gray suit, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment confusion crossed his features, before his usual mask of cordial condescension slipped into place. Margaret, what an unexpected surprise! He approached, glancing around as if looking for someone else. Is everything all right? Are you having trouble with the paperwork from Michael's estate? I fought to keep my expression neutral, suddenly aware of how much I knew that he didn't realize I knew. Hello, Jason. No, just taking care of some personal business. He frowned slightly, clearly trying to puzzle out why I would have business at such a prestigious law firm. Well, if you're having legal issues, you really should have come to me first. I have connections that could have saved you what I'm sure are considerable fees here. His tone was helpful on the surface, patronizing underneath, the same tone he'd used when explaining to me why I wasn't included in Winchester family discussions about the business. That's very thoughtful, but I'm quite comfortable with my choice of representation. I was surprised by the steadiness of my voice. How is Evelyn doing? Mother is coping as well as can be expected, he replied, his expression softening with what appeared to be genuine grief for his brother. Despite everything, I knew he had loved Michael in his way. She's worried about you, you know. That old house and workshop are a lot of responsibility. Please tell her I'm managing just fine. I pressed the elevator call button. Will you be at the memorial service next week? Of course. The whole family will be there to support you. He placed a hand on my shoulder. And Margaret, when you're ready to discuss selling the workshop property, I have some contacts who might be interested. It could provide you with a nice little nest egg for your retirement. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I'll keep that in mind, I said, stepping inside. Give my best to Caroline and the kids. As the doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of Jason's puzzled expression. He knew something was different about me, but couldn't quite put his finger on what had changed. I stood taller now, met his eyes directly. The deference he was accustomed to seeing was gone. The safety deposit box at First National contained exactly what I had expected and feared, more evidence. USB drives with recorded conversations, photocopies of falsified documents, and a detailed journal of Michael's investigations into his family's activities. But there was also something unexpected, a small velvet box containing my original engagement ring, which I'd believed lost during a move 15 years ago. A note in Michael's handwriting explained, "Evelyn took this from your jewelry box during Thanksgiving 2009. She claimed you were unworthy of a Winchester heirloom. I found it in her safe when I was searching for evidence of the financial discrepancies. It's yours, as it always should have been. I'm sorry I didn't confront her then." I slipped the elegant emerald and diamond ring onto my finger beside my wedding band, tears welling in my eyes. All these years, I'd mourned its loss, and Evelyn had had it all along. It was this small personal betrayal, more than the financial crimes or the manipulation of the will, that crystallized my resolve. This wasn't just about money or justice in the abstract. This was about decades of calculated cruelty, of being treated as an interloper in my own family. I called Alan that evening. "I've made my decision," I told him. "I want to meet with them, all of them, as soon as possible." 3 days later, I sat at the head of the conference table in Alan Prescott's office, waiting. Alan sat to my right, a young associate named Leon Way to my left, both immaculately dressed and projecting a calm confidence I was struggling to match, despite my new outfit, a charcoal gray pantsuit I'd purchased specifically for this meeting. My first time spending money from the accounts Michael had left me. The door opened, and Evelyn Winchester entered first, as was her custom. At 78, she remained an imposing figure, tall, slender, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and the ramrod straight posture of a woman who had spent her life ensuring others knew her importance. She wore an expensive black dress, still in mourning for her son, though the diamond brooch at her collar and matching earrings somewhat undermined the somber effect. Peter and Jason followed, both looking confused, but maintaining the confident demeanor of men accustomed to controlling every room they entered. Peter's wife, Susan, trailed behind them along with Caroline, Jason's wife. "Margaret," Evelyn said, surprise evident in her voice, "what is the meaning of this? We were told this meeting concerned the Winchester Corporation." "It does," I replied, gesturing to the empty chairs around the table. "Please, sit down." They exchanged glances but complied, with Evelyn taking the seat at the opposite end of the table, naturally assuming the position of authority. "I don't understand," Peter said, frowning at Alan. "Who are you, and why have you called this meeting?" "Alan Prescott," he replied smoothly. "Counsel for Winchester Holdings and Mrs. Winchester." "Winchester Holdings?" Jason echoed, his brow furrowing. "I'm not familiar with this entity." "You wouldn't be," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "It's a separate corporation Michael established 5 years ago. I'm the CEO." Silence fell over the room. Evelyn's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What nonsense is this? Michael would have told us if he'd created another company." I slid a document across the table. "Winchester Holdings currently owns controlling interest in Winchester Corporation, along with several other assets previously sought to be owned by your company." Peter grabbed the document, his face darkening as he scanned its contents. "This can't be legal. Michael couldn't transfer these properties without board approval." "He didn't need to," Alan interjected smoothly. "The properties were purchased directly by Winchester Holdings. They were never owned by Winchester Corporation, despite what the internal books might suggest." "Internal books?" Evelyn's voice was sharp. "What are you implying?" I met her gaze steadily. "We're not implying anything, Evelyn. We have documented evidence that you, Peter, and Jason have been systematically embezzling from the company for years, falsifying records and committing tax fraud." The color drained from Jason's face. Susan gasped, and Caroline's hand flew to her mouth. But Evelyn remained impassive, only the slight tightening of her jaw betraying her reaction. "Ridiculous," she said coldly. This is clearly some ploy Michael concocted to manipulate the family business. We all know he was becoming increasingly paranoid in his final years. Was he? I opened the folder before me and began placing photographs on the table. Shots of Peter entering a bank in Vancouver with falsified company documents, Jason meeting with individuals now under federal investigation for investment fraud, and most damning, Evelyn herself, removing documents from the company's safe late at night. These are just a sampling, I continued. There are financial records, recorded conversations, witness statements from employees you thought were loyal to you. I nodded toward Alan, who slid 3 thick binders across the table. The complete evidence is here, along with our proposed resolution to this situation. Peter was the first to recover. What kind of resolution? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. Winchester Holdings will retain ownership of all properties and patents currently in its possession, Alan explained. Winchester Corporation will continue to operate under new management with Mrs. Winchester as majority shareholder and chairperson of the board. This is absurd, Evelyn spat. No court would uphold this corporate theft based on fabricated evidence. Perhaps not, I conceded, but I'm quite certain the IRS, FBI, and Securities and Exchange Commission would be very interested in reviewing these materials. I leaned forward. Let me be clear. I don't want a court battle. I don't even necessarily want to see you prosecuted, though the evidence certainly warrants it. What I want is a recognition of my position, a peaceful transition of power, and certain concessions that are outlined in the documents before you. Jason, always the pragmatist, had begun reviewing the binders. His face grew increasingly pale. Some of this would be difficult to explain, he admitted quietly. Jason, Evelyn hissed, don't say another word. But it was too late. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. Peter was now looking through the evidence as well, his expression grim. The wives sat in shocked silence. You have 24 hours to review our terms, I said, rising from my chair. If you choose not to accept them, we'll move forward with submitting this evidence to the proper authorities Monday morning. Evelyn stood as well, her eyes blazing with a hatred I'd never seen so openly displayed. You were never worthy of him, she said, her voice low and venomous. A common school teacher bringing down a family business that has stood for generations. I met her gaze steadily. I didn't bring down anything, Evelyn. You did that yourselves. I'm simply picking up the pieces as Michael intended. As I moved to leave, Evelyn grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, noticing the ring on my finger. Where did you get that? She demanded, her composure finally cracking. It was returned to me, I replied simply, gently but firmly removing her hand. Where it belongs. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and second-guessing. I alternated between feeling empowered by finally standing up to the family that had belittled me for decades and terrified that I was in over my head. Several times I picked up the phone to call Alan and tell him I wanted to back out, to find some less confrontational solution. But each time, I'd look at the emerald ring on my finger and remember all the small cruelties, all the times I'd been made to feel less than, and my resolve would strengthen. On Monday morning, Alan called to inform me that Peter and Jason had accepted our terms. Evelyn was holding out, but without her son's support, she had little choice but to eventually concede. It's not surprising, Alan said. The evidence against Peter and Jason was most damning, and they have the most to lose. Evelyn's primarily concerned with her social standing. Actually being charged with financial crimes would destroy that instantly. What happens now? I asked, still not quite believing we'd succeeded. Now you become the chairperson of Winchester Corporation officially. We'll hold a board meeting next week to formalize the changes. In the meantime, I suggest you familiarize yourself with the day-to-day operations. Michael left extensive notes about that as well. I spent the next few days at the workshop, going through yet more files Michael had left These focused on the legitimate aspects of the business: client relationships, employee details, ongoing projects. I was so absorbed in my reading that I didn't hear the car pull up outside, only becoming aware of my visitor when a sharp knock sounded on the workshop door. I opened it to find Susan Winchester, Peter's wife, standing there. In 20 years of family gatherings, I'd exchanged perhaps a dozen meaningful sentences with the woman. She'd always followed Evelyn's lead in keeping me at arm's length. "Susan," I said, surprised, "what brings you here?" She looked uncertain, clutching her designer handbag with white-knuckled fingers. "May I come in?" I stepped back, allowing her to enter. She glanced around the workshop with obvious discomfort, as if afraid the dust might soil her expensive clothes. "I wanted to speak with you privately," she said, turning to face me. "About what happened at the meeting." I waited, saying nothing. "I had no idea," she continued, her voice low, "about what Peter was doing, about any of it. He kept saying the business was struggling, that we needed to cut back on expenses, all while—" Her voice broke, and I was startled to see tears in her eyes. "All while he was buying that young woman in Beaverton a condominium. Ah, so this wasn't about the business fraud at all. This was about something much more personal." "I'm sorry, Susan," I said, and meant it. "I wasn't aware of that aspect of the situation." She laughed bitterly. "No one was. Except Michael, apparently. It's all there in your evidence files, the payments, the property purchase. Did you know about it before? Did Michael tell you?" I shook my head. "No. Michael kept most of this from me until—" I gestured around the workshop. "Until he left me these records." Susan wiped away a tear. "How are you doing this, standing up to them? I've been married to Peter for 32 years, and I've never had the courage to confront him about anything substantial." The question caught me off guard. How was I doing this? A month ago, I would have thought myself incapable of such bold action. "I guess I'm doing it because Michael believed I could," I said finally, "and because after a lifetime of being made to feel small by the Winchester family, I've discovered I'm not small at all." Susan looked at me with something approaching respect. "What will happen to Peter? To all of us?" "That largely depends on your husband," I replied. "If he accepts the terms we've outlined, he'll retain a position with the company, though not as an executive. His legal exposure will be minimized. As for the rest—" I hesitated, unsure how much to say about her personal situation. "The rest is my problem to deal with," she finished for me. She straightened her shoulders. "Thank you for your time, Margaret. And, for what it's worth, I'm sorry for how you've been treated over the years. I should have been kinder." After she left, I sat for a long time thinking about her visit. It was the first genuine interaction I'd had with any member of the Winchester family besides Michael. Perhaps there was hope for reconciliation, at least with some of them. The board meeting the following week was tense but productive. Peter and Jason attended, both subdued and avoiding eye contact with me. Evelyn was conspicuously absent. The other board members, longtime friends of the family who had little to do with actual company operations, were clearly confused by the sudden change in leadership, but voted to approve all proposed measures after a private viewing of selected evidence. In the weeks that followed, I found myself immersed in learning the business Michael had built. I discovered, to my surprise, that I had an aptitude for corporate strategy and employee relations. The staff, many of whom had suffered under Peter and Jason's mismanagement, were cautiously optimistic about the changes I implemented. Evelyn eventually signed the necessary paperwork through her attorney, but refused to speak with me directly. I heard through family channels that she had taken an extended trip to Europe, telling friends she needed time away to grieve her son properly. 6 months after Michael's death, I finally felt ready to properly say goodbye. I visited his grave on a crisp fall morning, placing fresh flowers beside the headstone. "I wish you had trusted me with the truth from the beginning," I said softly, tracing the engraved letters of his name. "But I understand why you didn't. You were always trying to protect me." I smiled sadly. "I'm stronger than you gave me credit for, though. Than any of you gave me credit for." The autumn wind rustled through the cemetery trees, sending golden leaves spiraling down around me. In that peaceful moment, I felt a sense of closure begin to form. Michael was gone, but he'd left me with the tools to build a new life. Not just financial security, but the confidence to finally stand up for myself. "The company is doing well," I continued as if he could hear me. "We've landed 2 new major contracts, and employee morale is better than it's been in years. Your brothers are actually working for their salaries now, if you can believe it." I laughed softly. "They're not happy about it, but they're doing it." I sat in silence for a while, watching the interplay of sunlight and shadow across the grounds. Other mourners came and went, lost in their own grief and remembrance. "I miss you every day," I finally said, "but I'm going to be okay, better than okay." I stood, brushing leaves from my coat. "You always said I was the strongest person you knew. I'm finally starting to believe you." As I walked back to my car, my phone rang. Alan Prescott, calling to discuss a potential acquisition opportunity for Winchester Holdings. I answered, listening to the details of the proposal, asking questions about financials and integration strategies. Life was moving forward. Not as I had planned or expected, but forward nonetheless. From a broken workshop had come the pieces of a new beginning, one where Margaret Winchester was no longer just Michael's wife, but a woman of substance and strength in her own right. And for the first time since Michael's death, that felt like enough. More than enough. "Let's schedule a meeting to discuss the details," I told Alan, sliding into the driver's seat. "I think this could be an excellent opportunity." As I drove away from the cemetery, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was changed, more confident, more determined. A woman who had walked into a broken workshop and discovered not just hidden wealth, but her own hidden power. Michael's final gift hadn't been the money or the company. It had been the chance to discover who I truly was without him, and that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance of all. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.